What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast, where we take time out of our super busy and complicated week to bring you a video discussing and recapping the previous sermon that we did. I'm here, not as always, but this is becoming a fairly regular thing.
It is.
We should just get rid of Matt and just make this official.
He's kind of just like he's giving it to you.
Yeah.
Unofficially.
Is Michael Estes here, as always, to talk about the sermon, what he did right, what he did wrong, what he felt kind of weird about, and discuss things further. My name's Logan Elsie. I'm the student pastor here. I'm also the de facto host, I'll say. Does that mean that I'm the permanent one? I don't think I understand what de facto means.
It means kind of in point of fact. So, like, you are, in fact, the host today.
Then I'll stick with what I said.
All right.
That's not what I originally intended it to mean, but I'm sticking with it now.
How was your Father's Day?
Very boring, which is how I wanted
it. Good. What'd y'all do? Or what did you not do?
We went to Megan's parents' house. I took a nap.
Yes.
Stood in a pool. I wouldn't say that I swam. I just kind of stood in there. And then we ate some food. It was great. I was listening to a podcast talking about Father's Day, and they said how in the same way that Mother's Day is this huge deal and like it's very important for you to like make a big deal about Mother's Day, no one gives a junk about Father's Day, including the fathers. Mm-hmm. It's just like, oh, yeah, this is it.
Another day.
Go me. I get to pick where we go eat for lunch this day. And then
we had Mexican for lunch. I did not pick Mexican. I just went along with it because I'm used to doing that. And I was fine with it. I like Mexican. Our afternoon was the same way. It was very boring.
Yeah. I feel like that's good, though.
It was great.
It
was great.
Well, good. Let's go ahead and get into this thing then. As always, just remember that at the end of the podcast, as we're talking, we'll be thinking of a random question to ask you.
All right.
So, listener, if you survive all the way through this talk, at the end, I always get to ask Michael a very random question. Steven gets upset because we're usually way past time. And so, be looking forward to that. It's going to be great.
That was an awesome tease.
Hey, that's what I do. I'm a professional. De facto professional. So, we have been cruising through Philemon as part of the series. What's the series name?
Refresh My Heart.
That's it. I probably should know that as the new host. Where we're talking about what exactly?
Mostly about relational reconciliation. So, like, how do we heal relationships that have been broken?
And that is based off of the relationship between Philemon, a house church leader. Is that what we would call it?
I think that's the right way to say it. Yeah.
A house church leader and an escaped slave, Onesimus, who is coming back into the fold, not just as a returning slave, but also as a new brother in Christ. And Paul is kind of the mediator, mentor of both, trying to somehow fix and heal this relationship. And it's been a good series because I think it's brought up a lot of some not so great feelings, but also a lot of people I think are feeling the Holy Spirit moving them towards reconciling relationships with family, friends, and people that have hurt them in the past. And so
that's been the response I've gotten almost every week. I've had somebody come up afterwards and just kind of say, "I've been thinking about this. I feel like the Spirit's leading me toward this." It's been very encouraging on my part because I honestly, when I felt the Lord moving me toward Philemon, I was like, there are a lot of people that don't even know this is in the Bible, which is good from a teacher perspective. I'm thinking to myself, I do want people to realize this little letter's in here, but also like, is it going to relate? Are they going to connect to it? Is there going to be points of resonance that they're going to be like, oh yeah, I definitely see the Lord working in this way, and it's been very encouraging.
Well, even for the people who have read it, usually what it is, it's like, okay, forgive others, move on to Hebrews,
right?
And so, really taking a deep dive of like, why is this written? Why was this such a hard thing for Philemon to do? Why was it a hard thing for Onesimus to do? And really try to figure out that relationship, I think, has been very interesting. And I think people are responding to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you want to give like a 15-second flyover of like what the sermon was Sunday? And then we can get into it?
This one was mostly about Paul moving kind of from gentle encouragements toward Philemon to action steps. And so, like, he basically says, listen, here's the way you can make this happen. You can receive Onesimus back as you would receive me. You can, I'll repay you for the things that Onesimus, the ways in which Onesimus has harmed you. and I think he's speaking in terms of financial things specifically. But and then in the last part, Paul is requesting from Philemon refreshing. He's like, listen, I want to see this work out and be refreshed by the way it works out. And so he's like, listen, here are the action steps. Here's how we're going to make this happen. And he leaves it in Philemon's court at that point.
Yeah. And so there was one term that you used in this in the sermon. You said we need to practice cruciformity.
Yeah.
And I've never heard that word before.
Really?
Never.
Yeah.
I've heard of crucifix and cruciform, not cruciformity.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't we'll start off by you just kind of recapping what that is, and let's dive into it a little bit.
Yeah. So the word cruciform just literally means cross-shaped. And so cruciformity in life means that everything that we are thinking about, all the things that we're saying, the things that we're doing are shaped by the cross. And what that means is they're shaped by sacrificial, life-giving love, where we're willing to lay down our lives for the benefit of other people. We're willing to extend grace, which is what we see in the cross, is God's grace toward us. We're extending it toward others. And so everything in our life is shaped literally by the cross. And I think this is probably a way for us to understand Jesus' call to take up our cross and follow him. That's the idea of cruciformity, is how is it that the cross shapes our interactions with other people? How is it that it shapes the way we spend our money? How is it that the cross shapes the way we spend our time, those sorts of things. And so that's when I think cruciformity, that's what I'm thinking of.
So is that when people say like you need to reflect Christ or be like Jesus, is that the same thing, or is there a difference between, living like Jesus and living like the cross?
I think they're synonymous. I think they're the same idea. It's just a different way of thinking about what does it mean to imitate Jesus.
Right.
And it's kind of what we see happening with Paul. And like Paul literally almost takes on the shape of a cross here, because he stands between two people and like almost arms outstretched tries to bring them back together. So you kind of get almost a picture of the cross and what Paul is doing by working between Onesimus and Philemon and trying to draw the two closer together through, kind of extending grace toward both of them.
Yeah. And so an example of cruciformity in this context would be acting as a mediator between others. It could also be like Onesimus asking for forgiveness and I guess humbling yourself into that.
Right, because Onesimus had to realize I've done something wrong and I need forgiveness. And so there's a sense in which the cross shapes his understanding. The cross is our realization that sin it costs something.
Right.
And so we need that forgiveness. And then Philemon, he is being shaped by the cross in the sense that he understands that I need to extend forgiveness to someone because I have been given forgiveness, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Gotcha. And so when I was hearing the sermon and I was trying to think through, because especially with the Pauline epistles, the way that he writes is so personal at times. Like he's literally writing a letter to people. He's writing it to the church at wherever, but it's very personal. And so a lot of times when you're reading the Pauline epistles, it's very easy to get perspective. It's very easy to kind of put yourself in the shoes of whether it's Timothy, whether it's Philemon, whether it's anybody. I was catching myself trying to think through, if I was Paul, Philemon, or Onesimus, how would I handle this letter? Of Paul is trying to bring Onesimus back into this and really kind of push him into like, hey, I'm sure there were conversations of like, you need to go back, like you need to reconcile this. And the other way, he's trying to get Philemon to figure things out and push him to forgive and forget in a sense. But then Philemon, he's getting sort of called out in front of his whole church by Paul saying, hey, this needs to happen. I know you feel that this is the right way to go about it, but I'm asking and calling you to restoration and reconciliation. I was just thinking about all these different perspectives. And so I came up with some questions from each of the three perspectives. And so first, I wanted to talk about Philemon's perspective. And I had a question, just if I was in those shoes, kind of what would I think? And it's, how do you practice forgiveness of the forgive and forget, or the like, hey, it's fine, it's no big deal, or the, hey, you have a debt but I'm canceling that debt? How do you practice that without the becoming a doormat or being trampled
Sure.
on or taken advantage of? What's the balance between practicing cruciformed forgiveness without losing your humanity or your dignity or any of that stuff?
Yeah. It is for sure a tricky thing. I think Paul helps him in this. So Paul, by saying, I'm going to repay you, says that the offense that was, the offense towards you was a real offense. And so I don't think it means that we look at other people and we say they haven't actually sinned against us. They haven't actually, there's nothing to really forgive. So I'm just going to look past it and say it was not a big deal. I think that there is an admission that something really happened, and that we have chosen now in our forgiveness, we have chosen now not to see you that way anymore. And so there's a sense in which, this is what God does with us, is it's not that God forgets that we're sinners. It's that he is choosing no longer to see us as sinners. He's seeing us as his son.
Right.
And so I think in the same way, we do the same thing, because we don't think of God as a doormat in any way, shape, or form. And yet he practices forgiveness better than and more than any other being in the universe. And so we in the same way need to be willing to say, listen, you really did hurt me. That it really did hurt. I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to no longer see you in that light. And Matt and I talked a little bit about this last week. It doesn't mean that you automatically just say, okay, every part of our relationship that was before is going to be the exact same as it was before. There may be a period of time where there's a rebuilding of trust. There's a rebuilding of kind of restoring that relationship by step. But I also see in a place like 1 Corinthians 13 where, we have the love keeps no record of wrongs, and so there's a sense in which yeah, that's there, but I'm not going to see you that way anymore. I'm not going to keep a record of that anymore. And I think that there's a strength in that, because the easier thing to do is to say, I'm just going to hold on to this until the appropriate moment. And then as soon as you hurt my feelings again, or you say, I'm going to bring all that back up
then
again.
it's just ammunition.
Right. And we just don't see that anywhere. And think about Jesus restoring Peter after he betrays him. He restores him, and in that restoration, he's not like, hey, you betrayed me. He's like, I want you to understand what it means to love me and to love my sheep. John 21, if you want to go look at it, for those who are listening.
Or watching. We see you.
Yeah. Well, do we see them?
Yes, okay. I see through the lens.
Breaking the fourth wall. So yeah, I think to the world it probably will look like, hey, you're just a doormat. You're just I don't really care. It doesn't seem that the Bible cares very much what the world thinks about that particular sort of thing. There's going to be a sense in which we've got to be okay with this is the Christian way of understanding forgiveness from the forgiver's perspective.
So here, I'm in complete agreement. Because I'm in complete agreement, I struggle with this.
Yes.
Because, love keeps no record of wrongs. Fantastic. In so many places, Jesus just was so patient to the extreme of dealing with people. You have Hosea, where his wife continually left him, and he came and bought her back over and over again. So you see this almost patient endurance of forgiveness over and over again. But then you also see times where discipline happens, and you see times where God says no. You see times where there is punishment. You see times where that doesn't happen. And then just anecdotally in my life, there are times where I feel like forgiveness probably should happen, but it's not so cut and dry as forgive the debt, go on about your business.
Right.
So if someone who's thinking through this is they say I'm supposed to forgive, move on, and all that stuff, but I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want 2 weeks from now my Onesimus to take more money and run off again. what's the balance between that?
Yeah, I think the balance is, again, this goes back to there's a sense in which like there's gonna be a process of restoration. So like and again, I'm speaking outside of what Scripture would say here, and so I don't want anybody to take this and say this is gospel. So this is more like trying to think through what that process would look like on a just kind of a day-to-day basis. So let's say Philemon, Onesimus, they extend. Philemon extends forgiveness. Onesimus receives it. There's a restoration process that starts there. I don't know that it's like day one. Let's say Onesimus was taking care of the books in Philemon's house. All of a sudden, Onesimus is taking care of the books day one. He may be, but I think there's a sense in which like, hey, let's get you back in the house. Let's start to build trust again between one another, and so like, I don't think it's and it's not because you're holding it over them. It's more like we need to trust one another, and so that trust may start small and work toward larger things. I mean, we see that principle in some of Jesus' sayings. You know, he who is faithful in little will be trusted, kind of be trusted with much, right. That kind of thing. And so there's a sense in which like you can let that be a kind of a slow process, but not slower than it needs to be. Like, it doesn't need to be this, you've got to earn every bit of. So there is the relational aspect of you're now back a part of the family. Now let's start to figure out what that looks like practically on a day-to-day basis.
And I think there was the interesting part about it as well is with Onesimus, there was a lot of work done on the front end before this. So there's a restoration process on the back end, but then on the front end, you know, he at some point admitted that like he had done these things to Paul, probably after he came to faith. He came to faith, which was an actual salvation experience where his heart is changed. And then he's obviously expressed to Paul, either Paul has expressed to him and he accepted it, or he's expressed to Paul that he wants to go back. And there's been like, Onesimus is obviously committed, at least now, he's committed to doing that.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of times it's important to, you know, practice forgiveness, be extremely patient in how you give that out, and be overwhelming in how you give out grace, because God overwhelmingly gives us grace.
That's right.
At the same time, I think it's important to practice some wisdom and some intelligence. That's not the right word. Just be wise and discerning in, you know, is this person actually asking for forgiveness? That doesn't mean that you don't extend forgiveness for your own sake and just kind of drop that and detach from that. But as far as like letting people re-enter your life and bringing that about, I think it's important to make sure that you're just practicing wisdom and like, is this sincere? Is this whatever? And, you know, like cancel debts, but maybe not give them more money, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's times for that back and forth.
Yeah, and like there are different ways of understanding this too, because you can tell the difference between when somebody's asking for forgiveness and when somebody's looking for an excuse. So like if somebody comes to you and says, "Man, I wish our relationship was like it used to be," and there's no admission of any offense in that, like they're not asking for forgiveness. They're just like, I want you to overlook the thing that happened in the past and let's just move on from that. And I don't want to admit any wrongdoing on my part. It doesn't sound like, I think based on the letter and then, you know, like you said, the front end work that was done by Paul and Onesimus realized that he had done wrong and that there needed to be forgiveness. And so that's different than the I'm just going to make an excuse for myself and hope that you just forget about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the wisdom comes in.
Right. And trying to discern what their heart is.
Yep.
So switching gears, I think one of the most interesting things I really haven't thought about until on Sunday when you were teaching is Paul's act as a mediator, as an intercessory agent.
Yeah,
I like that.
I wish I would have used that.
And so as I'm thinking about that just feels so awkward. As like a millennial who doesn't really like to talk to people, who can feel awkward in certain situations. Me stepping into other people's business, that's a lot how it feels like. It can feel like, oh, I'm stepping into something I should not be a part of. Paul, however, steps in as a mentor, as a mediator, but also as like a church father to say like, hey, I want to help bring this to a close and bring about closure and also forgiveness and grace and mercy. So for Johnny, church member who loves God, is a part of a community, but sees an issue, how does he mediate that well? Should he mediate that? And what is the criteria for when we should step into other people's business?
Okay, so that's a great question. So because there's a difference between meddling and mediating. And I think the easiest way to tell the difference between the two is, one of the ways that you can tell is, are you invited in? Paul was obviously invited into the situation by Onesimus, because Onesimus sought him out. And my guess is Onesimus met Paul when Philemon got saved and started the church in his house. And he was like, he's thinking to himself when he ran away, well, at least I know there's one person out there that I can run to and at least talk to about what's going on and who knows the situation that I'm in, that sort of thing. And so Onesimus kind of invites him into the situation and begins to probably request for, like, how do we do this? Like,
Yeah.
And so if somebody invites you into a situation like that, I mean, one, use wisdom, but two, that means that there's a certain amount of wisdom on their part to seek out the advice of an objective third party. And Paul is most definitely an objective third party here. I mean, yes, he has a personal relationship with both of these people, but he wasn't affected by any of the actions that took place. And so only indirectly by, Onesimus showing up on his doorstep kind of thing. So I think if you're invited in, that's a good opportunity for you to take part in a mediating sort of way. I think that in a situation where you know both parties really well, and you know the heart of both parties, and you know the situation well, I think if you're going to step into that, you need to definitely seek out from one or both of the parties involved acceptance into that situation. So, like, let's say you see something that's going on. You know that there's a conflict between two friends of yours. You go to one of them and say, "Hey, listen, I see this is going on. I don't want to meddle. I don't want to put myself in the middle of this, but I do want to see you guys, restored to friendship, restored to Christian brother or sisterhood. I don't know if that's the right word. Fraternity,
sorority.
There you go. So I want to see you guys, that relationship healed. Can I be a part of that? If they say, no, I don't want you to be a part of that, it's obviously you need to step away and, let them try to handle that. But if at that point one of them says, yeah, I could use your advice on that, that's an invitation in. Now, that you took the step of initiating that conversation, but you did not force your way into the conversation, say, like, do the little trick thing where you say, hey, let's meet for coffee, and then all of a sudden somebody else shows up for coffee as well. That's
Classy.
A terrible idea. Don't do that.
You parent trapped them.
That's right. Do not do that in this situation. You're asking for trouble.
But even that part, I think there may not always be the next step, but I think there needs to be a next step of, like, that can very quickly turn into just a one-sided,
Sure.
I got your back. Then you hear one side of the story, you hear one very biased opinion, and that can go sideways really fast.
That's right.
So there may be a time where, like, if church member A invites you in, maybe with church member B, you need to at least try.
Mm-hmm.
And if church member B is like, I don't want you in my business, you may need to back out.
That's right.
Or at least with church member A, be like, hey, I'm here to encourage you, but I don't know if I need to be a part of this as completely as I need to be.
I can't be mediator in the situation. I can be here to support and pray for you, but I can't be the mediator in this situation.
Yeah. And the one thing that I would say, as a minister, we've dealt with all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to realize is, as someone who's jumping into something, which at the forefront is not your business, just to know that some people can be very emotionally expensive, and just to know really what you're getting into. A lot of these things we are very well-meaning, and we want to help, and we want to be a part of this and figure stuff out. A lot of this stuff takes weeks and months and years to process and deal with and walk through. And I would just very much warn, like, know what you're getting into. Don't get in too deep into everybody's stuff. Like, part of it being a mediator is, like, you're objective.
Yep.
And that means, like, you're not gonna, like, start taking one side or the other. You're not going to start like throwing someone else under the bus. You're not going to bring a whole bunch more people into this.
Mm-hmm.
But also just make sure that you know what you're getting into, because a lot of times you get into it very well-meaningly and realize like, oh, this is a lot. Like this is a lot. And if that happens, you have to know how to be able to pull a ripcord or at least create boundaries to protect yourself.
Yeah. Boundaries is the key word there.
Yeah.
Like every time, you know, it's one of those things where you've got to, the other person's got to understand, like, I can't fix all your problems. Like, I'm here to try to help you move toward healing. That's all I can do. I can't heal you.
Right.
And so, you know, understanding that is a really key. The key word there is boundaries for sure.
And more often than not, you should probably just stay out of people's business.
Yeah.
I think this
is a special circumstance.
This is a fairly rare thing.
Yeah. Now, that being said, if you are invited in, I think it's an incredibly powerful thing to be a part of something like that. And so, again, this goes back to wisdom and knowing how to deal with people interpersonally, you know, and knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Right.
And because there's a part in which you got to know yourself pretty well and be comfortable with who you are in Christ, and not take on responsibilities that aren't yours.
And just know what you can handle.
Yeah.
Like I know, for example, I know that if you think of like the amount of drama and stuff you can handle is like a drama meter, mine starts off pretty high. Like I can't just take on a whole bunch of drama, which doesn't work well for me when it's like middle school girls that are freaking out and they're like, Logan, help me. It's like, you really need to talk to Jenna. Like she would be a great option for you, because y'all arguing back and forth about wearing the same dress to homecoming. I
can't help that.
I can't help that. That's not my forte. And so, but I know that about myself.
Right.
And so, and when it's way more serious than that, like as someone who this doesn't really affect you to begin with, you're inserting yourself into that. Just have an awareness, and know, and be able to set boundaries where possible. And then it may just be that you're just there to encourage them and say like, hey, we want to be the church to both of you. We want to help you through this. As you handle stuff, whatever happens, we are still here for you.
Yeah. That's good.
So last perspective, Onesimus's perspective, I think it's very rare, and I think it's very not talked about. It's not talked about a lot of how to ask for forgiveness well.
Yeah.
How to take the position of humility, to take the position of the wrongdoer and approach forgiveness. And so I wanted to get your take on how do we be Onesimus well? If we have wronged someone, and like own it. Like if you've messed up, if you take fault, I guess A, how do we get to that point? And then B, how do we ask for forgiveness well?
I think it starts with being specific. And so like it's not forgiveness is, I mean, asking for forgiveness just kind of generally is kind of easy. It's going to be hard to say that because like there is a sense in which like there is a level of humility you have to say I've been wrong. But to be specific about that is so much, especially when you're talking about like dealing with people, not when we're thinking about like our relationship with God. Obviously, if we get specific, we're going to be like Martin Luther, the German monk who spent 6 hours a day confessing his sins to his confessor. Like we don't have time for that. Like we've been wrong in so many ways. It's hard to point out all the ways in which we've been wrong.
Right.
But when we're dealing with specific people in ways where we have sinned specifically against them and against the Lord, I think it's important that when we go to those people, we say to them, this is how I've wronged you. I know that I did these things wrong. And then moving beyond that and I know that it led to these things happening in your life. Like I know that it hurt you in this way, in this way, in this way. So that the person knows that that it's clear what you did. You understand that was what was wrong.
Right.
And because like, if somebody comes to me and says, I'm sorry about, whatever, like I'm just, I'm sorry if I hurt you. That's not really if I hurt you. What is that like?
Yeah.
That
If because you took it the wrong way, I'll apologize.
Right.
But you shouldn't have taken it that
That's
way.
exactly right. And so I think that the one who is seeking forgiveness has to take full responsibility, understanding that their actions led to specific consequences that hurt and offended another. And so, yeah.
When me and Megan were dating, there was one time where she kind of apologized. I can't remember what we were arguing about, but she apologized for something, and I was like, "Oh yeah, like I forgive you. That's great." And we were sitting there, and she was you could tell she was getting more and more frustrated, and I was like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "Well, I figured you would apologize too for the stuff that you did wrong." And I was like, "I don't feel like I did anything wrong." And she was like, "Well, I apologize so that you would apologize." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
I've done that before. I can't lie.
Yeah, because you're like, you expect, and especially with women, it's like, I apologize, you apologize, we hug each other, we cry, then we get on with our lives.
Yep.
But for me, I was like, no, you were in the wrong. You should have apologized. And she did not feel that way.
Yeah.
And so it does take the humility, I guess, and just saying, look, I have messed up. There's probably stuff that you did wrong too, but I'm going to take the blame for this and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think in our hospitality culture, I think we're very quick to apologize in a lot of different scenarios, which is good, but it can also tend to water down the really big stuff because we have a lot of people who apologize so much that when it becomes really serious, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, let's get past this. Like, sorry, and then you move on. When really, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in the act of like asking for forgiveness and apologizing and accepting that. That's not just like, oh, I bumped into you, sorry. It's like, and just saying like, I'd like to apologize or whatever. I mean, when you get to a certain level, there's like really deep heart stuff that has to go on for you to forgive. And I think sometimes we need to not apologize until we feel that, and just not make it so watered down and diluted, because otherwise we get to the point where if I said sorry when I bumped into you, or I said sorry when I stole $50 from your purse, and it's like, well, that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, because forgiveness is followed by like the idea of, so like if I'm seeking forgiveness, it's because one, I realize what I've done is wrong, but also two, I want to be a different person than I was before. It's not sorry, I'm just going to keep being this person. I just don't want you to be mad at me anymore.
Yes.
So there's got to be a desire to change that follows it.
I think that's something that we need to practice better.
Yes.
We need to practice more at being better at that, of taking the position of humility, taking the point of acceptance. I don't know if that's the right word, and just saying like, I messed this up, please forgive me, and then walking through that.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's not going to be fun, knowing that you've hurt someone and that is going to require healing, and then figuring that out.
Yeah.
Like, and when you break the vase, you're not just saying sorry for breaking the vase, but you're helping to clean up and replace the vase.
That's right.
And I think that can be simple when it's monetary. When it's not that,
it's emotional.
When it's emotional, and when it's big.
Yep.
But understanding that this can take time, effort, and things will not be the same.
Mm-hmm.
They can be good or better, but they won't be the same.
That's right.
So, speaking of that, last question I have, and then we can, shoot off the cuff and talk about whatever. As I'm thinking through this, and I think through arguments that I've had, times that I've been hurt, times that I have not wanted to forgive others, I tend to get defensive when things happen. One of my first responses to either many different things is to get defensive and angry. So for the person who is listening to this, or was listening to your sermon, and they thought, I just can't forgive that person because they have made me angry, they have hurt me, I'm just done with that person because I've forgiven them 1,000 times, I'm not doing it another time. What do you say to those people who are feeling those things?
Yeah. I would say that forgiveness, like love, is not primarily a feeling. Now, there are going to be feelings attached to it sometimes, but it's a choice. It's an act of the will on our part to say, I don't want to see you the way that I am currently seeing you now. I want to look past the thing that happened, and I want to see you in a different way. And we have, of course, we have all the admonitions in Scripture about how forgiveness is. It's not something that we are, we can do if we feel like that day, or, we're told by Jesus and by Paul that the expectation is that we forgive. And I love the very end of Ephesians chapter 4. Paul's like, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. And the realization that at our core, we're forgiven people. Like, we have received the forgiveness of God. That is who we are. And so because we have received God's forgiveness, we can't withhold forgiveness from another, because that, if we were to do that, we're basically saying that God's forgiveness is lesser than our own. We hold a higher place of authority in the life of another person than God does. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we can say that. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to feel really good about doing it right away, or in that moment. But I do think there's a sense in which, like, we've got to look beyond how we feel about that moment. And when we practice it, what's going to happen is our feelings a lot of times will follow eventually. It may not happen immediately, but eventually our feelings will begin to follow our act of the will. And this goes to that, Paul talks in other places about, like, how important self-control is. If I'm allowing my anger, my bitterness, my frustration with a person to control my actions toward that person, I'm not a self-controlled person at that point. I'm letting anger win. I'm letting bitterness win. And one of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, and so I want to be led by the Spirit in that. And again, I get the feeling of anger. I get the feeling of bitterness. I've been hurt by people before, and it is easier in the short term to feel angry and bitter about those things. But long term, it's definitely less emotionally healthy. It's definitely less spiritually healthy, and we at times have to make forgiveness this act of the will and not wait till we feel good about it.
And the thing about especially anger and sometimes hurt is a lot of times you feeling that towards someone is only affecting you. Mm-hmm. Very rarely is your anger or hurt or frustration and your reluctance to forgive someone causing them any thought or pain or anything. I mean, right. For the most part, they're moving on with their own life. And, whether they feel whatever is their prerogative and their thing. But when you hold on to those emotions and that feeling and that just darkness in you, then very rarely does that do anything but hurt you further.
That's right.
And so walking through that is difficult, but overall it takes weight off your shoulders and moves you to a place of grace and being able to move on. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's not easy.
Oh, no.
By no means is that easy.
What we're talking about is really hard right now. Like, I've heard from a couple people that were like, I'm thinking about doing these things, but like, this sort of conviction is hard, and I don't find in myself I want to do this right now, but I'm trying to make a decision about whether or not I'm going to do it anyways.
Right.
And I get that. Like, I really do get that. It's a lot of times so much easier just to hold on to that grudge, and culture tells us, like, we can do that, and it's not going to be that big of a deal sometimes. And people have to earn that forgiveness from us and that sort of thing.
And the hard part is very rarely is it as cut and dry as Onesimus wronged Philemon. Philemon, as far as we know, did not do anything wrong, and Onesimus is coming and asking for forgiveness. When you look at a lot of these people and us, where it's like, oh, we have family issues and family dynamics that it's not just, Aunt Susie wronged me, so she needs to ask me for forgiveness. Yeah. Usually it's, oh, we've been at each other's throats for 15 years.
I've done this to them. They've done this to me. Kind of
to find forgiveness. It's just to find forgiveness is going to continue to be messy, but a different kind of messy. Yeah. And Christmases are still going to be weird for a few years, even if we're actively working through this. Yeah. Where, even if Aunt Susie doesn't take a position of humility and forgiveness, I still need to extend grace and mercy, and I need to apologize.
Yeah.
And accept and own what I need to accept and own.
That's right.
It's just Yeah, like you said, it's just not fun. It's not easy.
Yep.
That was one thing that I think I'll end on is just saying, I think for so much of Philemon we read it as in like we need to I need to forgive so and so, or I need to forgive them for what they did to me. And I think for some of us we need to start thinking of like, where are some places where I have maybe wronged some people, I've burned some bridges, or I have lost some relationships that I need to start to figure that out. Like because I've been carrying that baggage of like, I burned this place to the ground on my way out, and I need to go start rebuilding.
That's right. Yeah, it requires us to be willing to reflect and to take time to think through those things. Probably with things that we have suppressed and put away because we were like, I'm just through with that, and I don't want to think about that anymore. And it's always been there, and it's affected our other relationships too. We don't think about that. I think a lot of times is when we get burned, in places where relationships were close or whatever, like. It affects our other relationships. So it makes it harder for us to trust people, and it makes it harder for us to open up to others and that sort of thing, and be intimate with other people. And that's something that we have to watch out for. That's one of the reasons that giving forgiveness to others is really, really important, because it frees us up to trust people and other relationships.
Yeah. There's a spiritual act of forgiveness, but there's also a lot of practical reasons to why you need to forgive. Like it just makes life easier and better in just a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, is there anything in particular that we didn't talk about that you wanted to point out about the sermon, about our talk, about?
Well, I will say next week we're gonna look at the end of Philemon. If you were to read the last few verses of Philemon, we're gonna go 21 through 25. You're probably going to look at some of that and think to yourself, I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, because like there's some people's names and stuff like that at the end. Paul always does that at the end of his letters. He points out here are some people that are thinking about you right now, or have been praying for you, or are here with me. Or there's going to be a name at the end of Philemon that's going to be really important, because it is a name where we see in Paul's life where he had to go through a process of reconciliation with one of these people in particular, and that's where the large part of next week's sermon is going to come from. And so I would encourage you to take a few minutes. If you're listening to this, it'll be I think Tuesday when it comes out. Go through those names that are there at the end of Philemon and start to do a little research on each of them and see if you can figure out which name is going to be kind of the key name when it comes to Paul practicing what he preaches here in this letter, because he does it, and it's a really kind of beautiful piece of restoration that takes place, because the disagreement was over something that we'd look at and we'd say, this is a good thing, and they're fighting over this good thing, and they get to the point where they can't be with each other anymore. And like it doesn't seem to make sense to us, but then there's this restoration that takes place later on in their lives, which is, I think, really, really important.
All right. I thought it was a great tease. There's a guy named Bill, I made that name up, who just listened to this, and he is 100% not going to go research and look up those names because he doesn't have a clue how to.
Yeah.
So give me 2 to 2.5 ways to research names like that.
Okay. So one thing that you can do is obviously you can just start in the letter, go to verse 23, and you'll see the names kind of listed out there, because he starts with Epaphras, and then he moves on. There you'll see some more names in verse 24. I would encourage you just to do a quick Google search, and you'll find that these names pop up in a couple of places. You can use an online Bible. That's another place that you could do it, and just put the name in, and it'll show you all the places the name pops up. Some of these names are going to pop up a lot more than others. Almost all of them will pop up in relation to Paul's letters, but there's a few in here that are going to pop up in relation to the wider scope of the New Testament, and 2 of them in particular will. I think another way that you can do that is just flip through the end of Paul's letters. So like start with Romans and work your way through all the way to Philemon, and just look at the end where he mentions people's names, and you'll see these names pop up over and over and over again. And that'll be a good start for how to kind of figure out what we're going to talk about.
We give you permission to use Google.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
You survived high school. You know not to use Wikipedia. Like, you know what to do. Like, it's okay to use Google. You don't have to, like, go to find a Franciscan monk and ask him his thoughts. you can probably go to franciscanmonk.org and do that and figure that.
I don't know if that's a website. I won't endorse that yet.
But there are.
Let me go look at it first.
There are very good online resources
Yeah.
that we can use, and we should probably have a episode where we kind of walk through how
Yeah.
to do that. Maybe on a podcast where people ask you questions or stuff like that. But my last question that I have for you, this is the complete random one.
All right, here we go.
I asked my family this yesterday. It's a would you rather question. So get ready, prepare.
Okay.
This is
I'm preparing right now.
this is what you can live without. So get ready.
Oh, okay.
Would you
Gosh.
rather go the rest of your life without wearing socks or without wearing glasses? Knowing that you have contacts.
Socks, 100%.
So you can handle like the stinky feet and the shoes and all
Yes. One, I can clean my feet, and two, glasses are so much more comfortable than my contacts a lot of times.
that. I completely disagree.
So now, I like my contacts when I have to go work outside and like I'm sweaty and stuff like that. Glasses are terrible to try to use, but like when I'm in the office reading and stuff like that, so much I like it. It feels so much more comfortable. And two, when I'm not here, I like to wear flip flops and
What?
yeah.
I don't believe it.
So
Would your answer change? Because my original question was sunglasses, but I don't know if you wear sunglasses
I don't
or
wear
not.
sunglasses
Because
at
you
all.
always, so if I had said sunglasses, you would have gone with socks because you never wear
what about you? What was your answer?
socks as
Yeah.
well. Because for my question, I was thinking more sunglasses, and I was like, I wear sunglasses most of the time where I'm outside, and I wear glasses when I'm not wearing contacts.
Yeah. See,
So-
Julie would have chosen socks.
She would rather live without socks.
Yeah, because like she's like you. Her eyes are very sensitive to the sun, and so she has, even on a cloudy day, she's got to wear sunglasses.
Does she have blue eyes?
She does.
I don't stare into her eyes. I've heard that people with blue eyes are
I'm
much
glad you
more
don't stare into her eyes.
much more sensitive to light.
Yeah,
So
that's what I've heard as well.
next time I'm gonna get about a foot away from her face and just stare deeply into her eyes and say, "We're both light sensitive, Julie, First Lady."
Please do it.
Just
Just let me be around for it because I don't want to see her response.
it'll be great, I'm sure. Well, I'm glad that you've enjoyed this conversation with us, talking about eyes and light and socks that smell, and also forgiveness and all that other stuff. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to like or subscribe or follow this podcast in any shape, form, or fashion. Leave a comment down below. It'll be great. Other than that, we will see you next week on the Ridgecrest podcast. Be good.